Uh, Ready? Okay. Hi everyone, happy to see such a big audience. I'm very happy actually to present to you tonight Otobong Nkanga and Nuno Vasconcelos, correct? Who have been collaborating on a few projects in the past. To give it a little bit of context of this presentation tonight is that upon invitation of Johan Pas, the Dean of the school, he invited myself and Judith Wielander to make a new program, which we called Expanding Academy. And in that context, we decided to not have a program where we invite guest professors to just come and take the role of a professor and be a teacher in a school, but we decided to invite a few people from the art field that had a practice which we are very strongly connected to, and to actually invite them to continue the practice for a longer time in the school. So in this case, Otobong and Nuno have been discussing with us about installing a working process in the entrance hall of the school. So in the next few months until the end of next year, we will transform it into some sort of laboratory where many things can happen. They will talk tonight a little bit about the context of this and how it potentially can evolve over time here in the school. Otobong has been starting it, I think, in Documenta, and then it moved to Berlin to the Gropiusbau, where it was there for more than a year, no? As a residency program. And now it gets continued in a university academy context. So we're very excited to see how this can develop itself and how you can become participants, co-producers of the work. So now I give the word to Otobong and Nuno.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see everybody here today. I will not speak in Flemish because I do not talk about my work in Flemish. I don't have the vocabulary for that. And neither will I speak in French, even though I can, but I will speak in English. So I hope everybody here can follow, and I'll try to speak slowly so it's quite clear. But I'd like to thank the Academy. I'd like to thank the director and the head of studies and Nicole, Judith, and all the different people that have invited us here to be part of this expanded academy. So I'm super excited. I do not know yet what it will be, but at least we have an idea and we'll see how we will develop with you on the ideas. But I thought today I would just focus on one work, and that's the project I did in Documenta called Carve to Flow. It's quite difficult to focus on many works because there are many works, many development, different approaches. But this is the work that we are working on to continue here in the Academy as a way of thinking, a way of site visiting, a way of expanding knowledge, a way of understanding the grounds we stand on. So I think one of the works that we have done, Carve to Flow, allows for those kinds of multiple ways of understanding geographies, understanding places, understanding labor, understanding soil, understanding body care, it ranges on different levels. But what I will do here is actually I will move, is actually to kind of explain the project and open up and tell you how the project has developed from the moment of inception till now. So I will start with an anthill. And in 2015, I visited Namibia. And I went actually to visit a few mines, so the Sumeb mine, Kan mines. And I was just interested in moving through the landscape for a few days and observing that landscape. I was interested in finding a mineral, the malachite. But there were a few things while driving through that landscape that really touched me, which was an anthill. So this was one of the beginning of a thinking process of imagining the amount of earth that comes out in the surface is actually the amount of earth that has been taken out from underneath the ground. So if we have to think of our world and the way it is, every single structure, a skyscraper, we can imagine a hole somewhere else in the world. So what is that correlation between things that we erect into things that are emptied out? And how come those emptied out places are places that we do not have access to? And so by visiting a mine, for example, in Namibia, you would start understanding what that meant in relation to building another place in another part of the world. I'm just showing you quickly images because I have a lot of images, but I'll go through them quite quickly. It's a way of understanding my thought process and how my ideas arrived towards thinking through for the project in Documenta. So this is Usakos, which is a place in Namibia. I pronounce it the way they do with that. And Usakos was one of the areas for the Germans to register everything that would be going out of Namibia. So especially minerals, zinc, copper, vanadium. And when I went and visited, this was what remained of it. So we're looking at something that happened in the early 20th century, early 20th century. And I went in 2015, and you find a sort of carcass, ruins, emptiness, and a pipe going through that. So I was interested in not only looking at places that develop a certain kind of economy, but also think about what happens when an economy dies. What happens when the ruin takes over? And these were also thoughts that I was thinking of in relation to, later on I'll talk about character flow. This was the Sumeb hill, the green hill. So let's imagine in 1904, very early 19th century, that this hill is actually filled color green. And they used to call it the Green Hill. So it's color green because of malachite, and malachite contains about 67% of copper. And so from far you would see a green hill. And the Germans and British discovered this mine, or this area with it's quite a huge hill. And from there, they were noticing local people carrying baskets with green stones. And they got to realize that this green stones, the locals were using to make their own jewelries and make their own pots or whatever they were using, was actually copper. So this is when, by beginning of the 20th century, they started digging into the mine. And at the end of the day, this mine went down to more than 42 levels underneath the ground. But the story of the mine, when I stood in front of this mine, I did a performance for the mine because it felt like a big scar in the body of the ground. It felt like if, for example, I was cut open at a certain part of my body, and what would that mean? So it's kind of like putting your body on the ground and imagining that you are this hill that has been emptied out, and not only emptied out, but dug into. And so there are works, for example, called The Weight of Scars that come from this thought process of thinking of different elements as bodies, and even water bodies, stone bodies, tree bodies. And what does that mean in relation to how we treat that? And if we kind of like became a stone, what would that mean? Or we became a mountain that has been emptied out, what would that mean? So that transposition of like thinking of self and a reflection, that every landscape is a reflection of self, becomes quite important in the way of thinking about the work. So when I was there, I had to appease because it was so emotional. Normally you couldn't access this area because it was behind the city of Sumeb. And I managed to get there, and there were 2 guards, and I spent some time talking to them, and they allowed me to enter. So the first time I got there, it was in the evening, and it was a bit too late. So the next day I went there at 5 o'clock in the morning and watched the sun rise and perform for the mine. And the performance for the mine was really a song for it. And also having the stones on my body and singing all the names that were contained in this mine. There were about 267 or so minerals that were in this specific mine. So the Sumeb mine is one of the most amazing mines that contains most of the minerals condensed in one space. And so I love going to not art fairs, but mineral fairs, which is kind of fun. And so you would find like a little kind of azurite, this small, and they'll be like, oh wow, this azurite is a mixture of, maybe it's got some tourmaline, or it's got some malachite, and then it's kind of stalactite. So there are all these qualities that actually give a mineral the value that it has. So a mineral found in Sumeb in the earlier 20th century could go up to, could go up to about 20,000 euros. So sometimes I'm like, oh, you see something and it's like, no, that one is, most people know that once you have a Sumeb mineral, it's one of like the Rolls Royce of minerals. So I didn't know that, but the way I discovered that was when I was in Berlin doing the DAAD residency. And I remembered a house that I would pass by every day that would have a copper dome, green copper dome. And at the same time, I was looking at minerals like mica and trying to understand that notion of shine. What does it mean within a space that you visit? How come the space is where people are attracted to? What is that attraction? And I started looking at the Naturkunde Museum in Berlin, and I found out that the directors of those museums were also the directors of the mines in Sumeb. And then I also realized that they had a huge collection of azurites and malachites in their collection. So that was the thing that triggered me to go to Namibia and say, okay, I'm going to do a field trip and try to find out what all this is all about. And behind the city, so when you arrive, welcome to Sumeb, welcome to Sumeb. You'd have flowers, it would look good, everything looks beautiful, but right behind you have to drive all the way back, and nobody really knows where it is. You're asking people, I need to find the Green Hill, the Sumeb mine, nobody knows. So I managed to get to the back, get to the mine, and then in Sumeb, you would hear a banging all the time, bang, boom, and the earth will shake. And I got to find out that there were smelters. So there are about 3 smelters in the world that actually clean copper and take out the arsenic in copper, and then the copper is taken elsewhere to be used. So Sumeb is one of them. So copper would come in from Bulgaria, from different parts of the world, into Swakopmund, drive its way all the way to Sumeb. They clean out, take out this arsenic, and then the copper is taken out of the of Sumep itself. So in the landscape, I don't have a picture of that. On the other side is actually a vast landscape of black smut, of slag. So all the residues and pollution remains from the mines have been put there. So I will then go into, I love this engines, this kind of towers that smoke comes out from. When I went to Bangladesh, this was another place that I was quite amazed with, just going by the riverside, and you have thousands of brick houses. So I was trying to imagine what the 19th century looked like in places like in Cornwall, in Europe, or even if when we go to Tilburg and you see the textile industry and what that kind of industry looked like. So what is interesting for me is like when visiting different parts of the world, you realize that you're actually in certain places in the past and in certain places in the future. So you're constantly moving between present, past, and future. And here, Bangladesh was one of those places that I would imagine the past and the future colliding at the same time. And the past within the kind of industry that is still in play, which resembled the kind of industries you would find in Europe at a certain time. But the present and the future in relation to thinking about floods, thinking about the kind of ecological systems that are in place, and it's a place that floods constantly, and it's a place that farming and thinking around new ecologies are also taking place. So you're looking at that collapse of the past, present, and future within one place. And so for me, it was interesting to use these kinds of places as thinking, as ways of thinking in relation to work. So I will now enter into the project Capture Flow. In 2016, I was invited by Adam Chimchik for Documenta, Documenta 14. I always mix dates up. And so it was quite interesting because the Documenta would take place in two places. So in Athens, and then later on in Kassel. But we only had like 2 months or 3 months in between to be able to do a project in Athens and then a project in Kassel, which was like in the head. Right, anyway, but I went to Athens in 2016, and when I was there, I visited a lot of the architectural structure. One thing I would like to say is that my work is fundamentally based deeply based in architecture. I'm very much interested in architecture, but you might not see it directly. But I'm interested in how things work, how a system is placed on another, how some of the installations really work almost like a mechano system where you break down and you expand or you reduce and you create a structure that holds one thing next to another. And I'm interested in ways in which a work can have multiple ways of being within a space. But one thing that really touched me was the caryatides and that notion of bearing and carrying life. So this women carrying the house. And I was looking at that at the same time, imagining, I could only relate to it in thinking of carrying your livelihoods as an African woman. And as kids, we learned how to carry things on our head, carry water, carry food, carry everything. So just to balance something on the head becomes very natural, that you can hold that, you can move with it, you can dance with it, you can turn with it, because you know, the body remembers how to hold something, how to work with it, and how to, from childhood you do it so you know it. But I never imagined that my body would still remember it until later on when I'm here and I need to carry something, and I put it on, I was like, oh, it's working. The body's still working. It's still like I can dance, I can, you can party with it. You can play music, you can move with it, whatever. Anyway, so But for some people, it's really serious. It's like, I'm carrying my life. I'm carrying my livelihood. I carry my kid on my back, and I carry the food on my head. But at the same time, being in Athens, I had to think of also people fleeing and carrying the last things on their kids on their body, their luggages on their head. And so it shifted from this idea of making a work that would only be thinking about issues or problems within a place, but to think about what is it to carry life? What does it mean to carry something and to give it life and to continue giving life? And so I started looking at things around the notion of support systems. So, for example, the book of Celine Condorelli around support structures, or looking at systems of grafting, started trying to understand what does it mean to support something architecturally, emotionally, psychologically, on all different levels, what it meant. And the formula that came was this. It's kind of weird, but that. The column and the beam. So we go back into like the notion of classicism or neoclassic architecture, the column, the beam, the thing that holds all this, the column holds all these beams around. Then I started thinking about, it was also in 2016 you had all these Brexit issues, and then also with America and the breaking of the kind of Western structures that seem to be so consolidated, and also that we're allies, the Second World War allies, all through the G7, all this, and then you start seeing that the temperatures of Europe, England, America, which are for me columns, became very fragile. And once Brexit happened, it dawned on me that I could not use the structure of the caryatides or the column, but to start thinking about maybe other structures that would allow for a thinking process for the project. So this was an earlier work that I did that was inspired also from the caryatid called diaspora. So I kind of put my work in between the thinking process. So I started looking at grafting systems, but one of the issues I had with grafting system was that I had a discussion with a forest guy in Germany, and he was telling me that there was a tree of 100 years that divorced from the other tree. So they had grafted them together, and after 100 years, it just kind of like sliced and they left each other. And so I started thinking also in relation to a lot of colonized spaces. And in a way, I feel like a lot of the colonized spaces, me coming from Nigeria, that we have a grafted system, a system of British education, British architecture, connected in a way with traditional African culture. But at the same time, you get to realize that you're living with many kinds of the traditional, the British, and then in between that, all the different cultures that have to struggle to live together. So I didn't think that that would be the best way to move ahead with thinking about the project. And then I thought about pillarization. So these are all grafting systems I was thinking of as a way of thinking. But then I went back to thinking around African architecture as a way of really thinking through the project. And it worked perfectly well because each structure, here, this is the Musgum architecture. So each structure, a person can live in that, and another one in the other place, and another. So if something happens to that structure, it doesn't affect the rest. Unlike the column and the beam, once one thing breaks, like Brexit, everything is still wobbling. We're still trying to, you see now there wasn't any petrol or gas in the UK, and then we'll have issues in Europe with certain things. So I was like, okay, I would want to work with something that if one of the elements in my thinking process breaks down, it doesn't affect the other. And by having the voot system and the wall that connects, it allowed me to think about ways of, like, for example, that could be Athens, that would be castle. Then I could think of the third proposal, the third phase, germination, or I could think of Nigeria. I could then think of other places the project could build on. And then there's the courtyard, and the courtyard is always to remind me of communication. That's the other brain, the stomach, the food, the kitchen, the part where you communicate, the part where you eat together, and from there, everybody can move in. Then here, the entrance can allow me to think of people can come in and go out whenever they want within the project. So that was the fundamental base of thinking of Cave to Flow. How much time have I got? Okay, let's continue. And then, this was in 2016, I made my mood board. So whenever I'm making some projects, I just kind of throw out thoughts. I don't know yet what I'm doing, because for Cave to Flow, I dreamt of the project, and the only dream I had was to make soap. So I woke up one morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I told my husband, yeah, I know what I'm doing for Documenta. I'm making soap. And then he was like, oh, whatever. 7 o'clock in the morning, but I dreamt it. And then in the dream, it was so clear that, yes, I will make soap. And in my dream, it was fabulous. You know how sometimes you dream something and you've resolved the whole project, but then in reality, you wake up, it's like, oh, damn, I still have a long way to go. So that was how I started making this mood board. So these were things in my studio that I'd collected from different places. This is an African soap, a black soap. This is from Aleppo. This is Oshun soap from Nigeria. This is from Damascus. This is clay. This is cacao. This is from Lebanon. And these are glycerine soaps. And then I was like, okay, I made this board. And then this is lye. And then I was looking at also the way the Syrians or the Aleppo soap is being mounted. So these were a way of setting the tone for the project before I started the project. I later on went to Athens, and I stayed in Athens for 4 months and started looking for people I would work with. So I created a team, and then the team, we worked all together to be able to create this project. So there was a graphic designer that would work with all the elements that we needed for the project. We worked with a botanist and a chemical engineer called Evi Lakana, and she was the one that advised on how to make the special soap for Documenta. We worked with Maya, and she was the curator, in-house curator and writer for the project, and also helping with production. And then we worked with Vis Oliveira, and Vis Oliveira, they are based in Kalamata, and they have an olive vineyard. So we could then, and he makes soap. He is a surgeon, but his passion is making soap, and he makes the best soaps in the world. I mean, amazing. So he goes to the hospital and comes back. He transformed his whole ground floor into a lab. But we did a lot of, this was in Athens. So in Athens, we created a lab. And that lab, we would make soaps, different kinds of soaps, and we would make different prototypes. So there are 10 prototypes we made. And from those prototypes, we chose one for Castle. The one for Castle contains babasu, which is a kind of palm oil, but from the Amazon, because we didn't want to use the palm oil that was that would be problematic in relation to Indonesia and forest, and so we had to look at provenance, where everything was coming from. Olive oil came from the backyard of the guy that made our soap, so he produced the biggest amount of oil. Shea butter from West Africa, L'Oreal oil that came from Middle East, sage oil also from the Middle East, cacao butter from West Africa, coconut from West Africa, carbon and water. So this is actually the formula of the soap. But you cannot tell because there are circles that are underneath circles, underneath circles. So even if you calculate it, you will never know the formula because the circles are hidden underneath the circles of underneath the circles. And you can still see the traces. For example, you see one here, one there, but that's the formula of the soap. So in Athens, we created a lab where all the elements we used are in the space, the oils, the containers, and you can see it here. And there was a dope that was running through the whole space, and you'd had the liquid also going through, oils going through the space. We were doing quite a number. Yeah, this is the L'Oreal oil, cacao butter, sage oil. So this is Maya Tunta, that's Evi Lakana, me, and we had a workstation. On the workstation, we did workshops with women and different people teaching how to make soap. We also had events where we talked, and people could stand around the table, and we would make soap and talk about geographies. We talk about the choices of elements that we use. So every element that you see in the soap is actually thought through. And this was the one we chose, the black soap. The black soap contained carbon charcoal, and why we chose that for Documenta was because if we remember during those days, and I think it's still going on, just that we're busy with COVID, many people were moving, and especially with the Syrian war, and also within West Africa, across the Mediterranean Sea and coming into Greece. So I started thinking around that notion of what it means to be able to breathe in a space. What does it mean to be able to feel that you're connected to a space? And that brings us back to the place of when I visited the mines and realizing that when a landscape is deformed, once it's shifted, once the economy is broken, once everything has been taken out or extracted, what does that mean to the oxygen of a place when you cannot recognize anymore the place you live in, where you cannot either find a way of like connecting to that landscape because it's completely been dilapidated or completely been transformed to a point of no return. And so the reflection of creating a work that kind of talks about a place that nourishes the world, that means with the oils, and at the same time, the same places, West Africa, North Africa, the Middle East, are the same places that are going through extreme crisis. So the notion of carbon or the notion of charcoal is to burn organic matter in the absence of oxygen. And that made sense to be able to use something to create a sculpture that contains the nourishment but also contains the chard. And when we look at many places in the world that contain the nourishment of the world, either mineral, food, or soil, or whatever it is that we need to extract, they are the same places that are going through the lack of oxygen. So if we think of the Amazon, or we think of the Congo Belt, or we think of many places that are extracting uranium, and the same places that are suffocating the land itself. So the sculpture is actually, this is it. The sculpture is actually that combination of nourishment and chard. But my inspiration was also to look at, for example, the Alep soap and how that was made. So I was looking at different kinds of productions in the world. So I was very much interested in the way the soaps were stored in Aleppo or in Palestine, the Nablus soaps. And those are hot processed soaps. We made cold processed soaps. The hot processed soaps would be stored for about 9 months. And as the older it got, the browner it becomes. So here, when it's green, it's really fresh. And I was interested in rendering an homage to a place that, due to war, has lost its continuation of knowledge that is passed from one generation to another. So you visit or you see images of a place that used to produce soap for the past 300 years, completely destroyed. So what does that mean in relation to an economy, but not only an economy, and also knowledge, and that knowledge that is not quantifiable, that has totally been eradicated in less than a year, or less than, in a year it's all gone. So with that, while experimenting or trying out and looking at the work from different perspectives, I started thinking around economies and what it meant to be able to transmit a knowledge that becomes something that is quantifiable, something that is generative for a group of people or for a certain culture or for a nation state. And that's when I realized that, okay, if I'm able to make soap today, that it's quite an amazing thing, because that could have been something that could have been lost along the way over thousands of years. And so for something to become part of our culture, it's something that is quite a miracle. It's not a given. And so in that way, Carve to Flow started thinking about ways in which we're thinking of transmission of knowledge, and that how economies shift from the soil to a tree, the tree to the oils to the soap to money, money to non-tangible knowledges and economies. And so that's how the third phase was born, in thinking about beyond just Documenta itself, but how that can continue in many forms and in many ways. So this was the work of the graphic designer, and we designed a box that would be foldable by the performers, which contained 8 poems, and each poem was written at different stages of the making of the soap. For example, 8 meat in a melting pot, 55 degrees perfect hot, sign a pact to form a solid block, bound by lie and blood. And this was actually thinking around that notion of pact making, and thinking about how a temperature of something can allow for a pact to happen. So when I talked about Brexit, or when I talked about America, and how the G7 in 2000, or G8 in 2016, 17, how that became hot, cold, the temperatures were no more aligned. So by just watching or observing the making of the soap, which would give the marble effect at 55 degrees. If I made it hotter, the marble effect will disappear. I got to realize that I can actually think through that in relation to politics or social structures that are falling apart, and how the notion of alliances and allies is really related to temperatures of places. When something is blowing hot and the other is blowing cold, it's not going to work. So the poems were ways of reflecting not only for the soap, but also in relation to thinking through what's happening in the society. So within that was also using the structure of the Musgum architecture to be able to create the costumes that would go with the performers. So during Documenta, for 100 days, we had 12 performers performing every day to be able to sell the soap. But you couldn't, even till now, you can't find the soap, only through exhibitions, through talks, through different things. And the performers would not sell the soap unless they had a long conversation with you. So the only way you could, so some people I just want to get the soap. It's no, you can't. We have to talk first. And the talking was to talk through just in general about the soap. But the soap would provoke many things to think around For example, an olive tree. What does it mean that an olive tree exists today? And we're seeing in relation to fires, or even the volcano that, pours out and it erases everything, or in Italy or in Greece where you have fires. What does that mean to a certain economy of olive oil? So as of now, we can enjoy those olive oils, but maybe if the temperatures of the world shift, we'll have to start maybe planting other kinds of plants in different geographies. But when you visit certain places, you see some trees that have been there for 500 years. And that goes in 1 second. So you realize how fragile it is to think even through certain kinds of things that we take for granted. But we are also not thinking about the soils that we work or that we farm, where there's so many things that we do not consider while we're consuming, that once you start understanding how those things are intricately affecting how we're eating, how we're navigating spaces, then you get to realize that it's extremely fragile, the things that we do not even imagine or think it is. So anyway, I'm rambling. And so that's just images. So here I'm just going to show a bit like the timeline of Carve to Flow since 2017. So I show this tree. This is in Kalamata. And when I went to visit Visa Oliveira, the guy that made my soap, he had these trees, and this one, I was hugging this tree because I don't know, I just hugged the tree. And we tried giving the formula of the soap to 3 producers. And he was the most expensive, even though he made the most beautiful soap. There was one of the guys we gave the formula of making our soap, and it came out dead. You know how someone would make something and you look at it and you're like, how possible? It was dead. So compared to him and the other guy, I wanted him. But the price for making each soap was so high, I was like, I can't do this project. But I didn't realize that when I had hugged his tree, that his wife told him that I hugged his tree, and I was talking to his tree, caressing the tree, and like telling how beautiful it was. Like, how could you still be here? Wow, like you're so amazing. Thank you for being here. Oh, like hugging and like really, it was like deep love for this tree. And then while I was writing an email to him to ask him, please, can he reduce his price? That, we wouldn't be able to afford to make 15,000 soaps at the price he proposed. And then I got an email, and that email, he sent me a love letter, seriously, in Greek. I didn't understand it, but it was all in Greek, this long. And then Maya was like, oh my God, this is a love letter. And in the love letter, he wrote to me, Otobong, I'm going to sponsor your project. I reduced the price from this to that. And he became the cheapest producer of the soap. So that's how I was able to make this soap, and then I got to realize that, oh my God, like even gestures that are out of the constellation, that there's certain thing about being aligned with certain things that become allies with you. So the tree body became an ally with me to be able to allow this to happen. So at the end of the day, we were able to work with him for the soap to be produced. That's why this tree is always like, thank you, like the best performer. So this is just a kind of, it's quite tiny. I thought we'll have a big screen. Anyway. So this was just the part I showed you, Athens to castle. It gives the dates, the names, Documenta. And then the third phase, after Documenta, it went to Moderna Musette. And there was a little counter, and we stacked the soap like a kind of 5,000 soap was stacked there. And then later on we went to Paris, and in Paris we did workshops with students and from Switzerland and from Paris, and also talks around soil, around soil, around earth, around liquids, there were many things. We invited different people, like Lorenzo Cicerone and Jennifer Teets. We invited Evie Lacana. We invited different artists, Tiffany Calmet, to be part of the talk. The work also went to, here in Chicago, at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and then we had performers performing and selling the soap also, in which the money then entered into a foundation, Carve to Flow Foundation here in Belgium with the Koning Boudewijn funds. And so there was a whole trying to understand, because you remember Documenta went bankrupt. So, sorry. So luckily enough, no, it's not funny, but it's true. Luckily enough, while doing Documenta, there were they had to get lawyers, a lawyer in Athens, a lawyer in Germany, a lawyer in Nigeria, a lawyer in Belgium. And all these lawyers had to advise me on how to be able to move money from one continent to another, and how to also, because in Documenta, it's a GmbH, it's like a non-profit company, so the money cannot enter into the system, so we had to create another system attached to Documenta in which the money had to go in, but not attached to Documenta, but with Documenta. So in that way, it allowed for the money to be safe. And then with that, the money had to then go into the foundation. Then from the foundation, it had to also go to Nigeria. Then from Nigeria, also to Athens. So the way of thinking about exploitation of materials in places was very important for me to think that the money has to go back to a place where the oils come from. That you're not just taking out of a place, but you're kind of putting back the money through another means. But anyway, I'll go back to that. Later on in Dakar, we were a school in Dakar, looking at how the notion of germination and how to be able to thrive in a place that is quite difficult to thrive. What does it mean to create structures in places that are resistant to structures? And so we had about 12 participants from all over the world joining the academy for 3 months. Then we were, we were at BAC in the Netherlands as a fellowship, Carve to Flow. And then in Nigeria, we bought a land, and the land now is going to be a farm, and at the same time we'll start working on workshops in training. We want to train a few women in knowing how to make certain products, but starting from plants and local plants in the region. So we're busy with that now, building the structures on ground. And then in Gropusbouw, we were a residency, and that's when I started working with Nuno. And Nuno was part of the first one of the workshops we did around soil. So to think about Carve to Flow, we were really starting from the place where things begin, the soil on which we start creating, having a tree, having the oils. And we wanted to start thinking around how to work with or to think through soil. And by thinking through soil, it means that what does it mean, that soil within the locality we live in? So if we're thinking in Antwerp, what does it mean? We walk past many things and we're not looking, or we don't even understand. I don't even understand what soil I'm working on. Then we have the port, we have the ballast, the earth coming in. How does that spread into the city? Then we also think about demolitions. We also think about pollution of the soil. We also think about the groundwater. So there are many things to kind of like understand within a city. And what does that mean? Like now we talk about the PFOS that happen here and the 3M. And you're like, it's very abstract, right? It's super abstract. It's like, oh, it's polluted. Don't eat eggs from this region. Oh, yeah. But I've been eating eggs from that region. Yeah, okay. And then you're thinking of all these things that we're not understanding how is affecting our livelihoods or the way of breathing or the industries that are around, how that enters in our breathing systems, how that enters into the groundwater, water bodies. So I'm interested in just understanding how, like just looking at soil, looking at different people that are working around that, even as a material to make work, a material to think through, as just a starting point. And so when I met with Nuno, we started working in Gruppersbau, and we did this space in which I think Nuno will develop further. And we're moving from that point that we worked in Gruppersbau to be able to develop maybe further here in Antwerp. Sometimes I forget which locality I am in. So I hope that it was quite clear. But I will hand this over to Nuno, and then later on we're very much open to questions. I've got all night. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will explain a little bit how it went with this room that we create in the Gruppersbau. Was a workshop room based on earth materials and waste materials like demolitions and other kind of earths that were coming out from some industries. So I start to work with this because I'm related with earth construction and specifically trying to reuse earth from excavations and demolitions. So this carve to flow started with in this period started with a research about soils and where the movements of the soils and trying to understand what is happening with these soils after they are digged out or the demolitions where they go. So we start to collect different type of soils and materials that we could work as a construction material also. So in the end, we started to set up the room with the materials. Let me see. So we started like collecting bags with a lot of materials and bringing in the room, and this would be the, let's say, something that you can touch, and at the same time we would start to thinking about it, like what is this earth, what is this land, what it means in Berlin, specifically there in Berlin. So we tried to organize it like in different ways of looking to the earth. Is this a political question, the earth, the soil, the land, especially in a city? Or is it economical? Or is just technique to build something? So we organized 3 workshops, and one of them was really technical workshop where people were coming to set up also the room and to try out some specific techniques how you can combine different earths and different materials and turn it into a construction material. And actually it's quite easy if you have the right earth, and many times we don't realize that, but there is earth everywhere. And this is a construction material. We just get rid of that, but we forgot that this earth have a potential, and we can reuse it, actually. So this was let's say, the starting point of this room, to set up the room. And at the same time, also for the museum was interesting that we could, not only for us, but also for the museum, that we could connect to the city. So we were based in this room, but trying to work outside the room, actually. So there was another workshop that started with a visit to a neighborhood that is called Ratibor. And this workshop was more to think about what means the soil in a political view and economical view. And this specific neighborhood, it was chosen because they were in this negotiation with the municipality, if they can continue there or if they would need to find a new place to continue with their activities. Is like a mixed activities place. It's not just for living, but to work. And there were like 70 people working there, but each one had his own practice, and also working for many directions in the city. So we start to talk with them to understand what is going on there, and how could we bring this theme or this subject to the museum and to talk about it. So we somehow, by not by accident, but this was there. This was a wall that is they need to repair this wall before it collapses, because there are bees inside. Every year, one bee digs a hole. So many bees are doing this alone, by itself. So each one have one hole in order to put the eggs. So the next, after some months or days, I don't remember how many days, but the new bees come out and they go to do their life. So this became a problem. It's like, oh my God, we need to kick out the bees. This is in Ratibor. They were thinking about, okay, we need to kick out the bees, and then we figure out, oh, this is a good metaphor to bring it up, because we are talking about a problem. Like this wall needs to be fixed, but there are life inside, and this life is important for the biodiversity. So we started to talk also about the biodiversity, and we invited also biologists to support us a little bit and to explain who are these bees doing this. So there was different days with different workshops, and we decided, okay, if we want to repair the wall, we should think about what is going on inside the wall, and if this is important or not. And this makes a metaphor and a bridge to the problem that this neighborhood is having now. If they want to kick them out, they need to think about them, and they need to think about the importance of this diversity of activities and diversity of people for the identity of the city. And this place, it's it's really in the middle of Berlin, and of course suffers a big pressure to be sold. So we somehow with the workshop with Earth, we start to think and to talk about that and to bring this theme to the room, and we decided, okay, let's build houses for insects with the Earth, because they were living in the Earth. They decided to dig holes. So we are using this metaphor. We will build the houses made with earth. Doesn't matter actually if the bees will go there, but the idea is to tell everybody that we need to think in all elements. So this was another workshop that we decided to do. We did again the technical part of making the bricks, of understanding the earth, understanding that this earth was coming from a specific place in Berlin. There was demolitions mixed also in the earth because technical reasons, and this create a conversation during some days, some weeks actually. So in the end, we end up doing these houses, and with the idea, we will bring these houses to Ratibor, and they will stay there. And let's see if there are bees going in there or not. But the main purpose was to make this metaphor and to bring awareness for this specific place. Also because a museum is it's, let's say, sometimes these places have another projection that can contribute to talk or to fix or to help specific problems. And this was a specific problem from this neighborhood, but it's a big problem in general. It's not just this neighborhood. Like Berlin is having this big problem here, probably is the same. Lisbon, everywhere is happening this economical, political issue. So these are just some photos from what we were doing there. And we end up with 2 columns. This is not done. And we try to reproduce the same mixture that was used in the wall, with the hope that the bees or the insects will start to dig here. It's kind of also a research experiment also for the biologist. He was really curious if it works, because some human decided to do houses for bees. You know. It's so now they are here. This is one corner of the place. We don't see so many buildings, but this one was from a graphic designer. She built up their studio. Here was an architect, and there was many other people working here. Also handwork, not just let's say these more computer works. So they are here now, and we will see next spring if it worked or not. But anyway, the main idea was to talk and to bring up a subject. We use the earth as an excuse to talk about the land and about this specific problem. So this was more related with politicians and political issues. And another workshop that was in preparation, but was cancelled by, let's say, the COVID reasons, but we were already facing some problems to build it. Because we decided to bring up also the education question, and we contacted the TU, the university, to work with a team there to create, let's say, experiment place, to use this room as an experimental place also for the students to develop some projects or whatever. But we would give a workshop, inviting also other people, like not specific people that are working with architecture, but could be the visitors. And so we would create different teams to work in this project, and basically would be to have an approach to experiment also with the academy. So this is a building technique that it's not very popular in the academies. Maybe it's starting now because it's getting fancy now. But this is actually an important sector about reusing the materials, about the footprint of the materials, and about carbon, and about many things that we don't. Maybe we start to talk now, but with this, there are some techniques that we should also know, and many times we don't know it in the academy. So this would be a 1 month workshop for the students to have the opportunity to touch the material, to understand, and to build something in real. So this would be a tower, build it in the middle of the museum, and this would be like a the exhibition would be already the construction. So after we build it, probably we would take it out, will not stay there long. So all this process of making things and would be actually the exhibition, not the final result. Anyway, we tried to do this. As also experiment. It's also experimenting with this technique and trying out what kind of environment you can create, and trying to push to the limits what you can do specific with the rammed earth. So this brought a lot of issues about security for the building because of the weight and so on, also budget things. And then the museum closed for Corona, and everything stopped. So this project ended here, and I think now we have opportunity. I will not say to build here a tower, but well, we never know. But to think about the materials and to start a new thing and to develop something using the most basic thing that it's earth and other materials, but try to make let's say, I will not say repeat this, but this is a starting point to be continued, and I would say I'm quite curious to see what will happen here. So I think it's that.
Um, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I think one of the things that we did not mention, was that the soil and the earth that you see here in this project, all from Berlin, from different parts of Berlin. Yeah, and so Nuno did the whole research of finding what soil from which region, like Potsdam, some from other regions in which we brought in. And so it was really functioning and thinking within that specific locality. So when people come to the space, you can really talk about elements or even the histories of brick making, because of specific areas that had different specific soils to be able to make the brick that you see and that color that goes with the brick. But also to talk about all the demolition that happened in Berlin and where did all that go? So you're looking at, we're thinking about restructuring or renovating a city, and then no one is kind of like, we're not really looking at the other side of what a specific reduction, or let's say demolition, where all those elements go to, and then you have new things that come up. So it was interesting to be able to just visit all these sites where you have concrete that are being recycled to use, or grinding it to become powder or become solid blocks, and then how that enters again into reconstruction. But we're not even talking about certain soils that have to be cleaned because of the pollutants that are in it. So there are all these things that are behind the scenes that we drive through a city and we don't realize that there are many other debris that find themselves in containers somewhere, or even shipped elsewhere, or even, so yeah.
And it's quite impressive, the amount of earth that is coming out every day from a city, or from a big city, and the amount of demolitions, and the amount of waste that we produce every day in a city, just related with earth. Now imagine related with everything, and if we start to look at these things, I think it will have also an influence in our behave every day, and also in the consume and how we live every day. So I think it's also important to bring these questions. Do you know what is happening with all this amount of earth? We were walking around, and I already saw so many mountains. What is going on here? What will happen here? And is this question sometimes is to deal with our own shit, let's say. It's like you need to deal with this. Don't look to the other side. You need to see it. And yes, it was quite impressive to make this journey around Berlin, because also to construct you need specific earths. So it's not all them that worked, but you can combine them. So you have already, it's quite easy to put earth to work as a construction material. So all this process was quite impressive to understand and to see all the economy around this production of waste and land and the earth. It's like it's so expensive to buy a piece of earth, but then you dig it out and you throw it, the earth away, and you build something. And it's curious to think in all these questions. What is the land for us? Now with the past situation, more people maybe thought about, okay, maybe it's precious to have a piece of land because we eat from the earth also. we do everything from earth. So it's good to think in the cities also what is this land or earth.
Let's open up the floor with some questions, maybe. I can pass around the microphone if there are any questions. Nobody? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your really incredible lectures, talks, both of you. I have a very specific question for Otobong. You mentioned very much about all the components of the soap, but not so much about the importance of the soap itself in terms of metaphors. Is it about purification? Is it about... But I'm just curious, how do you interpret this dream of soap?
Okay, thanks for the question. Is that working? Okay. There was a project I started in 2009 when I went to Marrakesh, and the work is called Contained Measures of Tangible Memories. So I was in Marrakesh, and different places I went to, there were elements that triggered my memory. So the 5 elements was mica, which was later on one of the works that I started working on in relation to In Pursuit of Bling, and going to Namibia, so that notion of shine and obscured spaces. Then the second work was indigo, which a lot of the things like indigo, visiting the market and seeing lots of indigo, and then the smell of indigo that brought me back, like triggered back. And then the other one was black soap, because in Marrakesh you have the black soap, but they will say savon noir. But in Nigeria, our black soap is like hard and more solid. And there it was like this liquid kind of thing that you would use in a hammam. But just the notion of thinking of black soap brought me back in when we used to make soap with my mother. And then there was the alum, the stone that you use for hygiene or cleaning. And we would hear alum, and we used the stone for cleaning snails, the African snails, so you get out all the slime out of it. And then there was a Cassia fistula, which was a plant that had this pod, and the pod would stink like hell, like really smell. But my brothers and my sister, we would use it as sword. So if you would hit it and then it touches you, because of the smells, like you're dead. So and then in Marrakesh, this pod was used to burn as incense to chase evil spirits. So there are all these different functions that I encountered, and black soap was one. So the dreaming of black soap was also in this work in 2009, and the idea of the black soap was to think of ways of, when I started working, there were many things that came up. People talking about the fat that was used during the World War II, that would take, and I was like, no, I'm not interested in that one. But what I was interested in relation to the soap was that notion of purification, but in a different form. That means thinking of the time we are in is a very minute time in relation to the history of the world, or if we think of deep time, and how even the geological formation of things are from millions of years, in which now we are extracting at a very fast rate. But we also have to imagine a future that will be a combination of our transformation with something else. But I was thinking, in this short time we are in, we are seeing things in such the emotion and the feelings of, and the intensities of things is so much that we cannot imagine a future in 1,000 years. So I was thinking, okay, if I make this soap, it also shows within the soap, that's why it's a solid block. something that looks like marble, but something that looks like marble that will melt away when water is added to it. So this times of crisis is just a short time in which things will shift, and it will be in history, and the places of crisis are constantly shifting in the world. So within Europe, the Mediterranean, the crisis, what happens in 100 years? Where will the tectonic structures shift? And soap was one of those things, and it forced me to also look at economy and the circular economy. So my interest in the soap was to be able to create something that can go back into the soil without polluting the soil. That also references the notion of something that will pass away. But also that people can get it, and then it's an artwork that can melt away, that can, shift. It's not meant to be stable. Also thinking around museum structures that collect and want to hold things and tighten them. And the soap will just slowly, change state, and you cannot hold it. You cannot force it to be something that is stable, because it is unstable. So I was interested in all these layers of things, and the soap was the only thing, or one of the few things, that can imitate that sense of solidity, but enter into a state of invisibility.
Hello. I have a few questions, but I'll try to keep them short. One is more a suggestion. As you know, currently there is a big wave of taking out all the asbestos out of the buildings in Belgium, but I assume all over the world. There is even shortage on people to do it. And in this summer I was in Cyprus, and I learned that there was European companies mining all the asbestos, which is now in all the buildings all over Europe. So, of course, you can imagine in which circumstances for the local workers, and there is also no, it's next to the European heritage forests, but there is no awareness around this. So it might be interesting for you to expand your practice, or even this current project to this giant amount of asbestos which came out of the earth in Cyprus, which polluted local people and workers there, and which is now currently being pulled out again out of houses all over and brought to some place, I don't know where. So that's just one thing I thought about. Now the question, so with the soap, I know a young company in Belgium, and some other people who make soap, which is also non-polluting, and try to make this go. Let's say, just this make me wonder how you think about if you try to achieve something like making this kind of soap. Let's say you are one small cell, and at the same time, all over the world, there's people trying to do the same thing individually and within their own practice. Like, how do you see or envision this in the future for your practices to connect these little cells of knowledge? Because, to make the process further, or to have more of an impact.
I'm always thinking of the notion of impact, not necessarily as something that is starting from, starting from a place of like a whole group of people coming together. But I feel like there are ways of thinking of impact that starts, like with Craft to Flow, it's like of course, there are people making soap. I'm not the one that invented it. And there are many people that have been making soap, and also indigenous knowledge is coming from people that understand how to work with, I mean, that's not something new, how to really work with connecting with the natural materials that are there and making sure that everything that goes back is clean. For me, it's not necessary. I mean, I'm not in, how do you say, I'm not so much interested in creating a whole cell of like groups and putting all that together. But I'm interested in, I would say for myself, even though we are mainly we, is to be able to find ways in which the reflection, it's not just, for me, the soap is not even that important. The soap is the alibi to be able to talk about things, to be able to create certain kinds of consciousness, to be able to ripple ideas to think about the landscape. The soap was just a way, is just a way to have that conversation. So there might be companies making, and thank God that there are thousands, if we could have as many as possible, making as much products that are cleaner and that can affect the way we live. But the notion of discussions and reflection is so important. And when I talk about non-tangible knowledges, it's not something that is tangible, but it's something like a young kid will learn. Hopefully in the future something happens and it's a ripple effect. Some of the things today are not visible. I do not know how much impact my work is having, but I know that it's having an impact, but I don't know how much. It's not quantifiable. It can only be quantifiable as time goes on. And so it's, if I have to think about joining all the structures, that's, yeah, it's not the way I'm interested in working, because each entity, each group is doing something impactful in a region, and we are so fragmented in a way that it's really hard to see in Lebanon who's doing what. You know of certain people working, but they're just different time zones, different climates, different politics, different. It's complex. But the only thing is that when you come across one, you support it. You support it the way you can. When you need to connect with one, you do. The thing is that there are networks that you can connect with, and they are there. But it's I know a lot of times we're thinking, how can we change the world? How can we do this? And we feel that, oh my God, it's such a heavy weight of things, but I just feel like by just small gestures, it's already a big thing. It's huge, because not many people, if you have the energy to do it, the mental state to do things, then you do it. There are not many people that are having visible illnesses, that have the mental state, that are not capable to do things. So the little thing that you can do by waking up in the morning and moving something is huge. And so I don't have the weight of worrying about if it has an impact or not. It's just that I have to do it so that at least something happens somewhere, like a little ripple. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, I was just interested in how you thought about it. You explained very well. It came in my mind because also about the bees and other things.
Yes.
I know a few artists or groups which are constructing this kind of beehives in different ways in cities, outside of cities, and maybe they are connected, maybe not. So I'm just curious. Just curious about how you guys think about. Well, I can imagine in my mind things always go very big. Like you say, sometimes you think it has to change the whole world, but I was just curious about how you thought about it, and you see these fragmented movements which could help each other, or maybe it's indeed there is no energy in the individuals to make. Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because sometimes when we see when there are moments of crises where something comes up intensely, all of a sudden, like in Lebanon, when there was the explosion, all of a sudden you had like many groups of people connecting. So there are many kinds of things happening, but sometimes there are moments when some things kind of work because we are in a way connected, and people that, oh, you have to connect with this one, connect with that, and then that network starts forming automatically without it being forced. It's forced by the context or the situation in which things happen. And so for me, calling some of my friends in Lebanon is like, oh, don't worry, there's this person, oh, I know this person, and that person, and this person. And then you start seeing that actually something that looked dormant or like looked like we're all doing our thing is that people are also seeing, and they're in other kinds of networks that are in place that glue things together when needed, and that sometimes you have to just work in a specific place with a specific community. But we realize that, and that's what is kind of beautiful in relation to when things are very intense, or when something explodes or something is out of control, that there are other networks that allows for something to still function, or that relieves or helps, or, and that for me, that is what I believe in that possibility. So it's not always the government that will actually help you, but it's actually people that you thought would not be there, or structures that are there that are quietly working, that all of a sudden are amplified in a moment.
I was also thinking that in this case the bees actually is not so important how you do the house for the bees, because they are the animals. They decided where they want to live. It's not now we will fix the problem about the bees. No, this was just an excuse to talk about the subject. And sometimes I think also that we try to see the global scale, and we forgot, or we forget the problem that it's on the next door. And by looking at it, you are also creating these small groups in the places. And like Otobong was saying, when you have a big catastrophe or something, the first person that comes to help is your neighbor, is not someone. Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, if we have also this relation and the community, and I think we also this is just my personal point of view. We should also stop to think about the global problem. Like, of course, there are many things to worry, but we need also to focus in the small scale. Because it doesn't matter if we are going to sell soaps all around the world. Is not the question. It's more about specific. It's like acupuncture that treat the patient, and yeah. It's more or less like that, I think.
Okay. Hello. I have a question for both of you. Maybe it's more to confirm an aspect of your work, if I understood correctly. I see the symbolic aspect, the social relations, the interconnectivity of the world. But what I found powerful in your work is our relationship to the matter, so the matter itself, so the soil taken out of the ground being made plates for a house, and the transfer of matter in the physics. So a woman carrying its household on her head, the matter itself, we as bodies, but mostly the physical aspect of it as a matter being transferred to another place. And I think this is very visible with the soil because you could visualize what the soil becomes, and it is brought back into the world, because even if a building collapse becomes dust and you can see the dust being there again. So I don't know if this is something you want to tackle in your work. And for me, this is positive because in the end, we may not have impact in the world, but we all turn in the same system, and this is all it's all part of us, and we are carried together with the matter. So that was my question, and in the sense that the matter has power, because mostly we always examine ourselves as actors. So, you know, in the Latour social network system, we are the actors, we build buildings, but the matter itself is powerful, is here, and I just wanted to ask if this is something which is present in your practice when you create things, or it's just my understanding.
Definitely, I think, well, for me, it's very important to understand that we're not just actors, and that if we are in the state we are in today, is that there are other organisms that are actors and are very strong actors. And for me, I've always been interested by, for example, when I showed the Bangladesh image, this was in 2020, in January. So while another thing was floating around in the air, traveling from places to places, we're already wearing masks in certain places because there are other kinds of things that are killing people. So if you look at all this, 1,000 of these engines blowing out fumes, and then you have the coal that is being used, you're arriving back, you wear a mask. You're wearing that because you're not wearing it because of this other thing, but you're wearing it because of this other thing. Or when you're in China, you're wearing this because of this. So the way of being or walking through space and realizing how your body has to adjust to the space you're living in. Or if you're in Namibia, after 3 days of being in Sumep, that I'm itching in my throat, and I see people spitting, and I start spitting, you realize that there are other things acting on you, that material that is non-visible, that is not tangible, that there are other things that are going through your pores, there are other things that are affecting the way that you even mental state, emotional state within a place. So for us to think that we are the main actors of what we are and what we become is completely different. It's completely not true. Another thing I was finding that was very interesting was when I was doing this research around trees, for example, the forest, when we go to, like in Germany, the trees, all that. And this specialist was saying, actually, we're having a big problem because there are more bacteria, more viruses, there are more things that are affecting the trees than we can imagine. So we're trying to import in trees that are stronger, and the native trees have to go. And the local people are fighting against the importation of trees because it's changing the shape and the form of their landscape. So there are many, you're looking at all these different elements that are affecting the way that your relationship to self and identity within a space that is beyond your own limitations of thinking of what you are. So that notion of, even when we think of race or think of skin, think of color, think of all that, if we move at a certain point beyond that part of reflection, we're able to see that at one point in time that will not even be the question. At one point in time the question is, how am I breathing? And we will all be in the same mess of breathing. How am I treating, how's my drinking water? Hello, you know. And so for me, that non-tangible, non-visible thing that is affecting DNA, affecting body, affecting, I'm interested in that. the other day I was in Torino and I was listening to someone that works with, this is a person that is designing, it's so funny, already talks about COVID already being there before, even before November, and people having the symptoms but not knowing that they had the illness, right? And he talks about how they are like working around designing and changing different ways in which the vaccine, in short, they're involved with all this. I can't go into details of it, but he talks about all these things. And then you are sitting down there in shock, understanding that there are already people that were working and thinking around this even before we are even, and the economy of that means people buying, it's so funny, people buying stock or companies in projection of, how do you call it? Already in advance before it happens, the speculation. And so the material is not only within but the material is also economic. The material is on different levels. And I'm interested in how one thing works with the other, and how it allows for certain things to affect the way we are in the society. So the soap is just one of those kind of like tentacles that connects many, many things in thinking about, self-care, in thinking about landscapes that are affected in my brain is going crazy, yeah.
I was wondering, when you were talking about reusing demolished buildings and reusing that material into bricks, did you also relate to the question what that building was? I was thinking it specifically because you were working in Berlin and they have all these buildings that are in a way contaminated by Nazism, and I was thinking of this museum they've built on top of the Gestapo headquarters, I think it is, and it's broken down, and it's this weird landscape of broken building, and they've built a new building on top of it, which is the museum, because they had to do something, and with this building that is so horrible they could not use it again. So I was wondering if you were using the history of the building that you had chosen to reuse, or that you were relating mostly to the physicality of it and reusing the fact that there was a building and then there was not.
I think in this case we could not do that because all this waste is collected and put it together in one place and then treated, like crushed, in order to be able to be reused. That can be treated. So in this case, I didn't thought about. I don't know if you thought, but I think that's also a powerful way to think about the things. Is the meaning of something that was in a specific place in a specific moment, and this can create a big relation with the way we connect with this thing. So in my point of view, it's very important to think about from where it comes, the material. In this case, we knew that was from Berlin, but not the specific building.
I sometimes I'm a bit somehow wary about how some things connect to some things. So in the sense of like thinking about if that structure or the soil or whatever is related to Nazism or fascism or whatever isms, it's not necessarily the place I would be thinking of, because the soil goes beyond ideology, right? The soil is something that is just contaminated by blood that pours on it. But then it continues. So if I have to think of, for example, I'm looking at, the other day I was in Ghent, and I was looking at them digging open this ground, and then there were these dead bodies. It was used to be a grave. And in some cases, you even dig further, and you'll find the Roman Empire structures underneath. So as you're dredging through and cutting through layers of history within the soil, it's very hard to remain on one. Because that soil has also a history that comes from compressed organic matter, comes from volcanic whatever that has layered and layered. So by arresting, and that's a lot of times I think the problem of like how to relate to people and how to relate to cultures and people, because we stop at one story. So when we, for example, think of a lot of Black Americans, we might think, oh, only slavery. But we do not connect it to like, what other stories are there? And that for me is the kind of limitation of understanding the complexity of one element that is beyond a historical point. And that historical point is just a fragment between all the stratas that allows it to exist and allows us to visualize or even connect to it. And that's why for me, it's not so important to only talk about, or to talk about that, but to talk about beyond ideology, beyond identity, beyond race, beyond, but in its kind of accumulative material that is eroding, reshaping, recontextualized, adopted, pushed away, enveloped, constructed with, that creates that matter and allows it to become powerful. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Maybe a very broad question. We're here in the context of an art academy. Mm-hmm. Today you're doing these studio visits these days. We have a very young audience today, which is wonderful. We are all very happy, I can say. How do we think about the role of the artist in society? How do we think of the future of art? It's a very broad question, maybe, but I think quite relevant.
There are many futures. It's a very, there are different worlds, right? There are different ways of like identifying what art is. And when I talk about the different worlds, is that there's the world of the economy of art, in which some of us are like thinking, how am I going to survive? How am I going to, I want to make work, but I need to also be able to live. And how that affects maybe the way that we work, and which it does affect the way that we work. There's also the aspect of different kinds of geographical spaces in which different kinds of art comes out. The future of art, I think, is very much intertwined with the climate. It's very much intertwined with the weather. It's very much intertwined with the possibility of getting materials. It's also intertwined with the technologies. It's an interconnected structure that is not on its own. If I, for example, my family's from Lagos, I'm the only one here. When you don't have like electricity for a long time, when you are living in a place that is a failed state, when you are not having the peace of mind to reflect, when you have to every day think about how am I going to eat, when you're in a place that it's not easy. It's a strive to be able to make work and to make art. People still make art. Even in war, people make art. So the future of art is connected to life itself. As far as there's life, there will be art. However that art will be conditioned by the conditions we live in. So when you have a flooding in Belgium, and if we constantly have a flooding in Belgium, as we've had in multiple places, how will that affect the way we store, we collect, we make? How does it affect the way that, we perceive physically, emotionally a place? Yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question, but I feel that but I feel that it's not just something that is so singular, and the way we are looking at it is like this singular force. And I know that there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of fear about the future, about how would we survive. And as artists, we make work, but it's not all the time that the work is seen, and it might not even be seen in our lifetime. It's not also sure that the work will even, we see, like, for example, a museum in Sao Paulo or in Brazil, or the Glasgow Art School that got burned, or the Notre Dame, so everything is as fragile as possible, but we continue to make, we continue to think, we continue to reflect. But the existence of it for an eternity is where it's uncertain. An eternity, what's that? But as far as we make. That's it.
Hi. You were talking about how you were in this mine in Namibia, and you described it as a sort of scar in the landscape, in the landscape being a body. And it's obviously scarred because it's being extracted for value. And I was thinking, do you relate, or how do you relate this to other bodies, non-human but also human bodies that are being extracted for value?
Yes. Well, I think we could actually see it kind of play out a lot about how the certain amount of people that were dying, the huge amount of people that were dying from COVID were mainly those that had to also go and work in the factories, work behind to make sure that systems still continue. So the notion of like discarded landscape, labor, and bodies are so entangled. I would talk about, for example, the Tsumeb mine in Namibia. The local people that live there, the Ovambos, refused to work in the mines when the Germans came into the space, and the Germans took away their possibility of eating. That means the lands that they worked on. So they became, they were totally starved until they had to come back to work in the mines. So when I'm thinking about bodies, or like, water bodies, or the same way that we are treating this kind of places that we're extracting from is the same way that we treat people that are working laboring in factories, that you use the energy till it's last and then it's discarded. And once that is discarded, we now see that we turn into the notion of automation. So even the discarded body is not even anymore the body that is the worker, it's the body that is not working. And the body that is not working in any form cannot generate a certain kind of, because the way we've designed our life is so entangled with an economy. It's so entangled that you don't get food if you don't get money. You don't get this if you don't do this. Unlike before, you had a land you could plant And when you plant, you can eat your food. You don't even necessarily have to have money. So the way things are entangled is that the body that labors, or the body that is even dormant, waiting for something, is the discarded body that is not even, it's almost like a scar, a wound. It's traumatized, it's mentally affected. And we're seeing that more and more, that people are trying to understand how are we going to move forward in life when your rent, house, whatever, you cannot even afford to buy, and to rent is getting higher. So that means you're entering into a machine that is grinding you even more, even when not working. So the scar is not necessarily a scar that you see. There are many scarred bodies in trauma of just thinking of the future, or being in the present and remembering the past.
I think maybe a relevant question is if we can have these minerals or these gems without actually scarring the earth, or also creating values of other types without scarring bodies, if there's other modes of production there.
I think there can, for me, I think that there can be possibilities, but within design of extraction, the design of extraction does not think of remediation. The design of extraction does not think of care. The design of extraction does not think of repair. And it's not that I'm only talking about in southern states. We're looking at Germany, look at Belgium, look at even within the European Union, look at Cornwall. The residues of the first mining zones in Cornwall is still polluted to today. So if that was taken in consideration in the way of like extraction, that you can also repair and remediate at the same time, there would be a different, like if you take one tree, you plant 5. If you take out the stone, you let it rest. You can cover it up, let it, build up again and start, but there's no resting. So I'm not sure that there is, it's a default by it's a default by design. And if design changes, the law changes, the way of looking changes, the way of care takes place, but so far everything has been designed in a way to upend and to take out as much as possible, to use as fast as possible. That's it. So that, for me, there is a big, big default in the design of things. And so when we're talking, that's why for me it's very difficult to think of like, yeah, we're going to change things like this, but I see it in a way that the change happens, like you talk about, in small impacts, because the bigger design of things is not being restructured. It continues. And so we thought, like with COVID, I was here, it's going to change, we're going to have more this, and people are going to be more this, and and then I'm like, I'm not sure. I might have a positive, optimistic, pessimistic approach to life, because I see life as a way that you have to go through it, live through it, and do the best you can in it. But that doesn't mean that best you can might change things. It might, and might not see it in my lifetime, but at least you know that you go through life knowing that you tried. It's not to be doom or like negative, because they're very beautiful things and they're amazing things. And also like with certain technologies we have, or certain resistance from indigenous knowledges, thank God that there are things that are still surviving. But at the same time, we are also seeing on the other side that these two worlds or different worlds are sliding together, and there's this tug and struggle to keep things alive, and a struggle for things to die. And there is the fight for things to die, as there is the fight for things to live. So an artwork. So an artwork manages to help us to go through life looking at things and reflecting, and sometimes to bring something that makes you smile or something that makes you believe. But also it's there to open up also the pits of hell for you to see how deep and dark we've gone. But it's at the same time to make you aware or to make you wonder, to look at things with ecstasy, you know, to be melancholic, to make you feel. That's it. And whatever you're feeling, good or bad, it's to make you feel.